Remove the memorial wall within 10 days, or the association will correct it at your expense. The sentence sat in black ink across the red violation tag hooked to Elias Brantley's front door, stiff as a warning label and twice as cold. Morning sprinklers hissed along Briarhook Lane, ticking over trimmed lawns while dry sycamore leaves scratched across the curb like little paper hands. The air smelled of hot asphalt, cut grass, and the faint chlorine drifting from the Stonevale Commons pool 2 streets over. Elias did not tear the tag down. He stood on his porch in a faded blue flannel shirt, one hand resting against the doorframe, his gray hair still damp from the shower, and his face as still as a courthouse clock. At the far end of the cul-de-sac, a white HOA golf cart rolled past with its electric motor whining softly, slow enough to be noticed, too slow to be innocent. A laminated placard on the cart read Community Standards Committee, though everyone on the lane knew it meant Marla Fenwick had found something new to dislike. She always did. The wall stood along the side of Elias's house where the public footpath curved toward the little town park, a low stucco surface painted years ago with white daisies, soft green vines, and the name June Brantley in modest blue letters. Below the flowers were old handprints, some large, some small, some faded almost to ghosts, left there by neighbors after the flood season when June had opened her home to people with nowhere dry to sleep. Nobody called it art. They called it June's wall. Marla Fenwick called it non-palette emotional exterior art. She arrived at 8:17 that morning in cream slacks, a pale blazer, and tan heels that clicked sharply on the sidewalk as if the concrete itself had failed inspection. Her hair was swept into a smooth blonde shell, her lipstick matched the red tabs on her clipboard, and her HOA badge hung from a lanyard across her chest like a sheriff's star in a kingdom made of mulch. She smiled before she spoke, which made the whole thing worse. "Mr. Brantley," she said, stopping precisely 3 feet from his porch steps, "the board has determined that the memorial display creates a visual inconsistency along a shared pedestrian corridor." Elias looked past her at the wall. A bee moved lazily over one painted daisy, confused by color that had outlasted the woman it honored. The sprinklers shut off at once, leaving the neighborhood in a damp, heavy silence. Marla lifted the clipboard. "The initial assessment is $487.63 for an exterior sentiment correction fee, $96.28 for an unauthorized memorial color audit, and $214.77 for cul-de-sac mood disruption." She turned one page with a manicured finger. "If you request board review, there is also a $58.41 administrative review surcharge." Elias finally looked at her. "A review fee." Marla's smile tightened, but only at the corners. "Administrative time has value, Mr. Brantley." Behind a half-closed blind across the street, Harriet Lowell watched without moving, her coffee cooling in one hand. A mower stopped 2 houses down, then started again too quickly, the way people do when they want to pretend they have heard nothing. Elias took the red tag from the hook, folded it once, and slipped it into his shirt pocket. "I'll review it," he said. Marla waited for anger, embarrassment, apology, anything she could record as noncompliance. Elias gave her none of it. He stepped down from the porch, walked to the wall, and brushed a bit of dust from June's painted name with the side of his thumb. Then he turned back toward the house as if the conversation had already ended. Marla called after him. "Silence will not stop enforcement." Elias paused with his hand on the screen door. For the first time, his voice lost all warmth. "No," he said softly, "but paperwork usually does." By noon, Elias had not called Marla, had not written an angry email, and had not walked across the lane to explain what June's wall meant to anyone who should have already known. He carried the red tag into his small back office, where the blinds were half closed against the white heat of the afternoon, and the old ceiling fan clicked every 4th turn. The room smelled faintly of cedar drawers, printer ink, and the lemon oil June used to rub into the desk before church socials. He opened a file. On the tab, in neat block letters, he wrote Fenwick Overreach, and beneath it he placed the folded violation tag inside a clear plastic sleeve. Then he took out a yellow legal pad, wrote the date, the time Marla arrived, the exact wording of each fee, and the names of the 2 neighbors who had likely seen the golf cart slow near his curb. Facts first. At 1:08 p.m. his inbox chimed with the cold little bell of the Stonevale Commons resident portal. The message had no greeting beyond "Dear Owner," and the subject line read "Immediate Exterior Compliance Pathway." Attached was a PDF with the HOA seal, a scanned signature from Marla Fenwick, and a checkbox marked sentiment-based visual nonconformity. Elias read it once, printed 2 copies, saved the original, and saved the file properties before the portal could replace the PDF with a cleaner version later. He had seen boards do that before. Outside, a leaf blower started on the next street, roaring over the neat lawns while the smell of hot mulch and gasoline drifted through the window screen. Elias moved to the hallway closet and lifted down an old black equipment case that most people would have mistaken for a toolbox. Inside were a compact laser measure, a handheld document scanner, a moisture meter, archival tape, a small calibration card, and a camera with a fixed timestamp function. He charged the battery. At 2:30, he walked along the side yard with slow steps, gravel crunching under his work boots as he photographed the wall from 12 angles. He measured the distance from the wall to the public footpath, the edge of the drainage strip, the old survey pin near the mailbox cluster, and the painted handprints closest to the corner seam. He did not touch the flowers except once, to brush away a dead gnat from the blue curve of June's name. His hand stayed steady. By late afternoon, the HOA golf cart passed again, this time with Marla in the passenger seat and a younger board volunteer driving as if he had been deputized by a clipboard. Elias heard the electric whine before he saw them, soft and smug under the cicadas. Marla did not wave. Elias raised his camera and took one clean photograph of the cart in the public lane. After dinner, he drove his silver pickup to the county records annex, where the parking lot still held the day's heat and the lobby smelled of floor wax, paper dust, and burnt coffee. Tessa Rowland, the records clerk behind the counter, looked up when he asked for archived easement maps, pedestrian corridor agreements, and any civic art covenants attached to Briarhook Lane. Her eyebrows lifted at the phrase civic art covenant. Most homeowners ask for fence permits, she said. Elias set his driver's license on the counter. Most homeowners don't have a board president trying to rewrite a map with a red tag. Tessa studied him for a second, then rolled her chair toward the older terminal. Keys clacked, the printer groaned, and somewhere behind the staff door a copier coughed like an old truck. Elias waited without pacing. When the first map slid from the printer, he saw the thin shaded strip beside his house, marked public pedestrian access by municipal retention agreement, dated 13 years earlier. He did not smile. He only tapped the paper once with 2 fingers, exactly where Marla had stood that morning, and asked Tessa for certified copies. The first certified letter arrived 2 mornings later, pressed into Elias's mailbox with the green receipt card folded so tightly it bent at one corner. The mail carrier's tires crackled over loose gravel as he pulled away, and somewhere down Briarhook Lane a sprinkler head sputtered, caught, then began its thin metallic ticking across a perfect square of lawn. The envelope smelled faintly of toner and damp paper, as if it had spent the night in the back of a truck with wet catalogs. Elias opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a formal notice of escalated noncompliance, 3 pages long, printed on thick white stock with the Stonevale Commons seal at the top and Marla Fenwick's signature at the bottom in a broad blue flourish. The letter stated that his failure to submit a memorial removal plan had created continued aesthetic instability along the pedestrian corridor. It also added $132.49 for a second-look exterior harmony assessment, $44.16 for resident portal document upload handling, and $287.05 for failure to pre-schedule sentiment remediation. Elias read each line once. Then he slid the pages into separate plastic sleeves. At 9:42, the resident portal sent another email, this one colder than the letter, with no name attached except compliance desk. It warned that unpaid charges could proceed to pre-lien review if not resolved within 14 business days. The phrase sounded official enough to frighten someone who did not know the difference between authority and formatting. Elias knew the difference. He printed the email with full headers, saved the attachment, and wrote portal threat language escalated without board vote on his yellow legal pad. His handwriting did not change. Across the street, Harriet Lowell carried a watering can to her porch geraniums and glanced toward his side yard with the careful sadness of someone wanting to help but not knowing where the line was. Marla's golf cart rolled past just before lunch, its tires whispering over the curb seam, a small plastic flag on the rear fluttering with the HOA logo. She wore dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky and held her clipboard flat across her lap like a judge's bench. When the cart slowed near June's wall, Elias was standing beside the old survey pin with his laser measure. Marla removed her sunglasses. "Documentation will not change the violation, Mr. Brantley." Elias recorded the distance from the pin to the footpath edge. "Good documentation changes most things." The young board volunteer behind the wheel gave a nervous laugh that died as soon as Marla turned her head. A gust pushed dry leaves along the gutter, and the air carried the sharp smell of pool chlorine mixed with hot rubber from the golf cart tires. Marla stepped out, heels tapping once on the pavement, then sinking slightly when she crossed onto the damp strip beside the sidewalk. "You should understand," she said. "The association has wide discretion over visible exterior elements." Elias looked at the wall, not at her. "Visible from where?" Marla blinked. It was a small question, but it landed like a pebble in machinery. "From the shared community corridor, naturally." Elias wrote those exact words down. Shared community corridor. Marla watched the pen move and seemed to realize too late that he was not taking notes for himself alone. Her mouth thinned. "You are making this more expensive than necessary." That afternoon, another red tag appeared under his windshield wiper while his truck sat in the driveway, even though the driveway was not part of the wall complaint. The tag listed $63.72 for delay processing charge, $119. $84 for supplemental board review, and $18.09 for courtesy tag placement materials. Elias photographed it before touching it. He captured the windshield, the wiper, the tag, the driveway line, and the reflection of Marla's golf cart turning the corner at the end of Briarhook Lane. Then he removed the tag with 2 fingers and carried it inside. By evening, the folder labeled Fenwick Overreach was no longer thin. It had certified letters, portal headers, red tags, photographs, measurements, and a certified easement map from the county records annex. Elias placed the newest tag on top, closed the file, and rested his palm over it for one quiet second. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its polished silence. Inside, the trap had begun to hold weight. On Tuesday morning, Elias left the house at 7:36 with a canvas grocery bag, his county file folder, and the silver pickup's keys resting flat in his palm. The sky hung low and white over Briarhook Lane, the kind of humid suburban morning when the asphalt smelled warm before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops. Sprinklers hissed in 3 separate yards, a garbage truck groaned at the entrance to Stonevale Commons, and the small American flag on Harriet Lowell's porch barely moved. It was too quiet. Elias paused at the end of his driveway, not because he had forgotten anything, but because Marla's golf cart was not doing its usual slow patrol near the mailbox cluster. He looked once toward June's wall, where the painted daisies still held their soft color in the gray light, then drove away without changing his expression. At 8:14, a white contractor van rolled into the cul-de-sac and stopped beside the public footpath. Its side panel had a magnetic sign for a budget painting company, one corner peeling away from the metal like a bad decision. Marla Fenwick stepped from the passenger side of the HOA cart behind it wearing a pale blue blazer, white pants, tan heels, and a laminated badge clipped high on her lapel. She carried a clipboard and a paper cup of coffee. The painters unloaded drop cloths, masking tape, rollers, a 5-gallon bucket of flat exterior white, and a portable sprayer that coughed twice before starting with a low mechanical buzz. Harriet saw them from behind her kitchen curtain. So did the young father 2 doors down, who stood beside his minivan with a backpack in one hand and his mouth slightly open. Marla lifted her chin and announced, loudly enough for the nearest houses to hear, "The association is performing authorized visual neutralization under emergency exterior standards." Nobody answered. The first strip of masking tape slapped against the edge of the stucco wall with a dry snap. One painter looked at June's name and hesitated, roller hanging from his hand, but Marla tapped the clipboard with her pen and pointed to the work order. The paper showed emergency visual neutralization cost, $739. 12, billed to owner account pending recovery. It also listed administrative oversight presence, $88. 33, and corridor emotional stabilization materials, $146. 59. The roller touched the wall. White paint crossed the first daisy in one thick, wet stripe. The sprayer followed, whispering over the vines, the handprints, the blue letters, and the small painted sun June had added near the lower corner, because she said every flood ended somewhere. By 8:47, half the wall was gone. By 9:12, only faint raised shapes remained beneath the coating, little ghosts under fresh paint. The smell of latex hung in the damp air, sharp and clean in the most insulting way, mixing with cut grass and exhaust from the idling golf cart. Marla watched as if a problem had finally become obedient. At 10:03, Elias's porch camera uploaded the final clip to cloud storage automatically, exactly as he had set it to do the night before. At 10:41, Tessa Rowland called his cell while he was parked outside the records annex, and he listened as she told him she had found the old Covenant Index under a retired municipal arts program. Elias thanked her, wrote down the document number, and placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. Then he drove home. When the pickup turned onto Briarhook Lane, the contractors were gone, but the smell remained, drifting over the sidewalk like a freshly painted lie. Elias parked in the driveway, stepped out slowly, and stood before the blank white wall where June's name had been. A single drip of paint had run down near the bottom and dried over the smallest handprint. Elias touched that place with 2 fingers. The paint was still tacky. Across the street, Harriet opened her front door but did not speak. Elias lowered his hand, looked at the wall for a long time, and said in a voice so calm it barely reached the porch, "Now she's on the record." By the time the sun dropped behind the roofs of Stonevale Commons, Elias had turned his dining room table into something no one in the HOA would have recognized as grief. The room smelled of old paper, black coffee, and the faint latex still drifting in through the side windows from the wall outside. His porch camera footage played silently on his laptop, the timestamp glowing in the corner, while Marla's pale blazer moved across the screen like a signature she had not meant to leave. He watched it twice. The first clip showed the contractor van arriving at 8:14, tires rolling over the curb line beside the pedestrian access strip. The second showed Marla pointing to the wall with her clipboard, while one painter hesitated near June's name. The third showed the roller crossing the first daisy. Elias exported all 3 files, copied them to a thumb drive, uploaded them to a cloud folder, and wrote the file names by hand on his yellow pad. Redundancy mattered. At 6:22, the resident portal chimed again with a new statement, and the little sound seemed too cheerful for the amount printed beside his name. The invoice listed $739, $12 for emergency visual neutralization cost, $88, $33 for administrative oversight presence, $146, $59 for corridor emotional stabilization materials, $52, $07 for post-correction visual verification, and $311, $64 for owner resistance processing. Total due, $1,337. $75. Elias printed it without changing expression. Then he opened the certified packet Tessa Rowland had prepared at the records annex, sliding each page from the envelope as carefully as if it were a fragile photograph. There was the municipal retention agreement. There was the public pedestrian access map. There was the archived civic arts index. And there, stamped in blue by the town clerk, was the Civic Remembrance Art Covenant from 13 years earlier, naming the wall as a non-commercial community memorial attached to the Briarhook Lane footpath corridor. Marla had painted over a document. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and went quiet, and a warm wind pushed dead leaves against Elias's garage door with a dry, nervous scrape. Elias placed the covenant beside the HOA invoice and drew a single line between the 2 dates. The covenant came first. The board's authority came later. He opened the Stonevale Commons governing documents, not the glossy welcome booklet the HOA mailed to new homeowners, but the recorded declaration with amendments, signatures, and county filing numbers. Clause 7. Forgave the board control over ordinary exterior color schemes visible from streets maintained by the association. Clause 11. 2 carved-out municipal agreements, public access easements, and pre-existing civic use covenants. Marla had skipped the one paragraph that mattered. At 7:05, Elias wrote 3 letters. The first went to the HOA board, requesting preservation of all records related to the wall, including emails, invoices, meeting notes, payment approvals, contractor communications, portal entries, and any messages using the phrases visual neutralization, emotional exterior art, or corridor stabilization. The second went to the HOA's civil liability insurance carrier, attaching the covenant, the invoice, the video stills, and a notice of potential restoration damages caused by action outside recorded authority. The third went to the town clerk's office, requesting the memorial's protection status be confirmed in writing before the next HOA meeting. None of the letters sounded angry. That made them heavier. At 8:18, Harriet Lowell knocked softly on the front door, carrying a faded shoebox in both hands. Elias opened it to find old photographs, curled at the corners, showing June in a rain jacket beside the unfinished wall while neighbors pressed painted hands to the stucco. In one photo, a little girl with pigtails had left a purple handprint near the bottom corner. Harriet pointed to it. "That's my granddaughter," she said, her voice thin. "She's in college now." Elias looked at the photograph, then at the blank wall visible through the side window. The porch light hummed above them. "May I copy these?" he asked. Harriet nodded, and for the first time since the paint dried, someone in that house almost cried. It was not Elias. By midnight, the folder labeled Fenwick Overreach had become 3 folders: authority, damage, and witnesses. Elias set them in a row, square with the edge of the table. Then he sealed the first envelope, pressed one stamp into the corner, and whispered to the empty room, "Let her explain it now." The special meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 6:30 p.m. in the Stonevale Commons clubhouse, a low stucco building beside the pool where the air always smelled like chlorine, burnt coffee, and carpet that had absorbed too many summer potlucks. Folding chairs scraped across the vinyl floor as residents filled the room in cautious clusters, whispering beneath the buzz of fluorescent lights and the soft thump of the pool pump behind the wall. Marla Fenwick sat at the front table in a pearl gray blazer with her badge clipped straight and her clipboard placed beside the gavel as if one explained the other. She looked pleased. Elias arrived at 6:27 carrying 3 labeled folders, 1 thumb drive, and a flat cardboard envelope of photographs Harriet Lowell had lent him. He wore the same blue flannel shirt, clean jeans, and work boots still dusted with pale grit from the side yard. He did not look like a man entering a fight. That made people look twice. Marla opened the meeting with a rehearsed smile and a voice polished smooth enough to hide the blade underneath. "This session concerns an owner's continued refusal to comply with exterior standards and the association's corrective response," she said, tapping the agenda packet. "As of today, the outstanding balance is $1,337.75, excluding possible pre-lien preparation and follow-up visual inspection charges." A few residents shifted in their seats. One man in a golf shirt looked down at the invoice page and frowned at the line reading Owner Resistance Processing. Elias remained standing near the aisle. Elias waited. Marla invited him to speak in the tone of someone offering a guilty man one last chance to apologize. Elias walked to the front table and laid down the first folder, authority, squarely in front of the board secretary. The paper inside made a soft, final sound. "Before you discuss payment," he said, "you should determine whether the board had authority to create the charge." Marla's smile stayed in place, but her fingers tightened around her pen. Elias opened the folder to the recorded declaration, then turned to Clause 11.2 and slid the page toward the board. He placed the certified pedestrian access map beside it, then the civic remembrance art covenant stamped by the town clerk. 3 pages. One problem. The board's secretary leaned forward, lips moving silently as he read. Elias did not raise his voice. He explained that the wall was not an ordinary exterior feature subject to routine color control, that it was attached to a municipal pedestrian corridor, and that the covenant protecting it predated the HOA amendment Marla had cited. Then he inserted the thumb drive into the clubhouse laptop, and the wall screen flickered to life. The porch camera footage filled the room. Marla stepping from the golf cart, pointing with her clipboard, watching the painter cover June's name. The room went still enough to hear ice shift in someone's plastic cup. Marla stood. That video was taken on private property. Elias looked at her. "My porch." The screen changed to the HOA invoice showing emergency visual neutralization cost, administrative oversight presence, and corridor emotional stabilization materials billed back to Elias. He placed the second folder, damage on the table. It contained photographs of the wet paint, the contractor van, the raised outlines beneath the white coating, and a preliminary restoration estimate from a conservation specialist for $8,964.40. Marla's face lost its careful color. She reached for the clipboard, then seemed to forget why. Elias placed the third folder down. Witnesses. Harriet Lowell stood from the front row before anyone called her name, holding a faded photograph of June smiling beside the unfinished wall after the flood. "My granddaughter's handprint was under that paint," she said. Her voice did not shake. The board members stopped looking at Elias and started looking at Marla. Elias took one sealed letter from his coat pocket and set it beside the gavel. "The association's insurer has been notified," he said. "The town clerk's office has certified that the covenant is on record. Your records preservation notice is in that envelope." For the first time all evening, Marla had nothing ready to say. For several seconds after Elias set the letter beside the gavel, the clubhouse did not sound like a meeting room anymore. It sounded like a house after a plate had shattered, all breath held, all eyes lowered toward the pieces. The fluorescent lights hummed above the folding chairs, the pool pump thudded behind the wall, and outside the open side door the smell of chlorine drifted in with the damp evening air. Then Harriet Lowell stepped into the aisle. She held the old photograph against her chest, not high like evidence, but close like something that still had a heartbeat. "June made sandwiches in that house for 3 days during the flood," she said, looking at the board and not at Marla. "My daughter slept on her living room floor." A man in the third row stood next, the same young father who had watched the painters from his driveway. He said he had always thought the wall was just pretty, until his wife found an old picture of his son's preschool class leaving handprints along the bottom. His voice grew quieter when he said the boy had asked why someone would paint over people's hands. Nobody answered. A retired teacher named Mrs. Blevins lifted her cane and pointed at the screen, where June's name was frozen beneath the painter's roller. She said the handprints were from a town service day, not a private decoration, and that Marla had been told once before during a welcome committee walkthrough. Marla's eyes snapped toward her. Too late. The board secretary asked whether minutes existed from that earlier walkthrough, and Elias opened the witnesses folder without hurry. He slid forward a photocopy of a 13-year-old event flyer, a newspaper clipping from the county weekly, and 3 photographs showing the public path filled with volunteers, children, folding tables, and buckets of paint. The room began to change. People stopped watching Elias as if he were defending himself and started watching Marla as if she had cost them something. The treasurer, a thin man with rimless glasses and a nervous habit of tapping his calculator, leaned toward the insurer's representative, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier and now sat near the back with a leather portfolio on her knees. "Does this affect coverage?" he asked. The woman did not stand. She only said, "It depends on whether the action was authorized under the governing documents." That was worse than a no. Marla tried to recover by returning to the language she trusted most. "The board acted to preserve community value," she said, smoothing the front of her blazer. "Emotional displays visible from shared areas can create inconsistent buyer impressions." A groan moved through the room, small but unmistakable. The man in the golf shirt lifted the invoice packet. "Did we vote to spend HOA money on paint and bill him for a fee called owner resistance processing?" Marla's mouth opened, then closed. The treasurer flipped through his own papers, and the plastic calculator stopped tapping. Harriet looked at Marla with a sadness sharper than anger. "You called my granddaughter's handprint a mood disruption." The sentence landed harder than shouting. Someone near the back whispered that the pool deck repairs had been delayed for 2 months, yet the board had money for a whitewash no one approved. Another resident asked whether other fines had been invented the same way. A woman from another street inside Stonevale Commons said she had paid $72.18 for a holiday tone adjustment after leaving warm white lights up through January. A retired contractor said he had been charged $41.90 for ladder visibility review when he cleaned his gutters. The meeting was no longer about one wall. Elias stood still beside the table, hands resting lightly on the back of a folding chair, saying nothing while Marla's kingdom emptied itself in public. The board secretary removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We need counsel before any further enforcement," he said. Marla turned on him. "I am the president." He looked at the covenant. then at the frozen video on the screen, then at the residents who no longer looked afraid of her clipboard. "Tonight," he said quietly, "that may be the problem." The board did not adjourn so much as collapse into procedure. The secretary called for a recess. The treasurer gathered the invoices with both hands, and the insurer's representative stepped into the hallway to make a quiet phone call beside the vending machine that smelled of dust, warm plastic, and stale peanut candy. Outside the clubhouse windows, the pool lights glowed blue under the evening dark, and the pump kept thudding as if nothing important had happened 30 feet away. Inside, Marla Fenwick stood very still. Her clipboard remained on the table, but no one was looking at it anymore. After 12 minutes, the board returned without the easy stiffness they had worn at the beginning of the meeting. The secretary's voice cracked once when he announced an emergency motion to suspend all enforcement actions related to Elias Brantley's property, pending legal review. The treasurer added a second motion to rescind the $1,337.75 balance, reverse all related portal charges, and freeze Marla's unilateral spending authority until the board completed an internal audit. The words unilateral spending authority changed the room. Marla's head turned sharply. "You cannot do that in an open meeting," she said. But the secretary had already opened the recorded bylaws to the section on emergency fiduciary risk, and for once the paper did not belong to her. Elias stood near the back wall, hands folded over the top of his folders. He did not smile. A resident from the next block asked whether the association would also refund other questionable charges, including the $72.18 holiday tone adjustment, the $41.90 ladder visibility review, and a $26.03 porch chair alignment notice someone had paid in March. The treasurer looked smaller with every number. Harriet Lowell sat with the old photograph in her lap, one thumb resting over her granddaughter's purple handprint as if protecting it from a second coat of paint. Then the insurer's representative returned, her heels soft against the carpet, and asked that the minutes reflect a potential claim involving damage to protected civic art, unauthorized expenditure of association funds, and possible restoration liability. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Marla tried to speak again about buyer impressions, community values, and emotional exterior consistency, but the phrases sounded thin now, like plastic signs bending in hot weather. The board secretary interrupted her with a motion requesting her resignation as president or, failing that, a formal removal vote under the bylaws within 7 days. A murmur ran through the chairs, not loud, not cruel, just final. Marla's polished face tightened around the mouth. "After everything I have done for this neighborhood?" she asked. No one answered quickly, which was worse than disagreement. The vote to suspend her authority passed first, 4-1. The vote to rescind Elias's charges passed unanimously. The vote to hire a conservation specialist using HOA operating funds passed after the treasurer warned that delaying might increase the $8,964.40 estimate if the latex cured deeper into the original surface. The room understood that Marla had not protected property values. She had created a bill. By 8/19, the secretary asked for Marla's board badge and temporary clubhouse access card. The little plastic card made a flat sound when she placed it on the table. Her clipboard followed it. For the first time since anyone could remember, she walked out of a Stonevale Commons meeting with empty hands. Outside, dry leaves scraped along the pool fence, and the smell of chlorine followed her into the parking lot. No one chased her. No one shouted. Residents simply turned away and began forming a line near Elias, some offering photographs, some offering names, some asking how to protect other things the HOA had made them feel too small to question. Elias accepted each one with quiet nods. When Harriet reached him, she touched his sleeve and said, "June would have hated all this attention." Elias looked toward the dark windows, where the blank wall waited beyond Briarhook Lane. "She would have liked the part where people finally read the fine print," he said. 2 weeks later, the conservation specialist arrived before sunrise with a portable canopy, conservation-grade gels, cotton pads, low-heat tools, and a van full of instruments that looked far too gentle for the damage Marla had caused. The morning air on Briarhook Lane smelled of wet grass and cold coffee from paper cups balanced on porch rails, while residents stood along the sidewalk in sweaters, work shirts, and quiet disbelief. No flyer had been printed. Word had moved through porch conversations, group texts, and quiet phone calls because the wall mattered. Elias stood near the driveway with his hands in his coat pockets, watching as the first strip of white latex lifted from the stucco in a pale curl and revealed the green stem of one painted daisy underneath. A woman covered her mouth. Harriet Lowell gripped the old photograph so tightly the cardboard backing bent at the corner. By mid-morning, a certified copy from the town clerk's office had been posted beside the footpath, showing the wall's recorded civic memorial status, and the HOA board secretary had taped a second notice to the clubhouse door announcing a special vote on reforming enforcement powers. The legal consequence arrived in plain daylight. The emergency board resolution and settlement terms required Stonevale Commons to reimburse Elias for every charge connected to the wall, pay the full $8,964.40 restoration estimate, cover the specialist's follow-up preservation sealant, remove all invented sentiment and visual mood fees from the portal, and create an interim homeowner appeal process, pending formal amendment, for any violation involving memorials, accessibility, easements, or pre-existing civic agreements. It also barred any future HOA officer from ordering corrective work on private or covenant-protected property without a recorded board vote and written legal review. Marla Fenwick's name was not on the new policy. That was the loudest part. By afternoon, the first handprints began to reappear under the white coating. Blue, purple, green, red, faded at the edges but still there, still stubborn, still human. A little crowd followed every discovery with a soft breath, as if each color brought back a person. The retired teacher identified one handprint from an old class photo. The young father pointed to the lower corner and whispered to his son that those marks were made by people helping each other, not by a committee approving paint colors. Even the treasurer came and stood at the curb, holding a printed copy of the new rulebook with the uncomfortable expression of a man who had learned that neat accounting could still hide ugly decisions. Near sunset, Marla drove past in her own car, no badge, no golf cart, no clipboard on the passenger seat. For one brief second, she slowed near the footpath, and the people along the sidewalk turned their heads toward her without saying a word. Then they turned back to the wall. That was how the whole town turned against her and the association she had used as a throne, not with noise, not with threats, but by deciding she no longer deserved the center of the room. When the final layer was cleaned, June Brantley's name appeared again in blue letters, slightly scarred but clear. Elias stepped forward with one white daisy, placed it at the base of the wall, and rested his palm below the restored handprints. Behind him, neighbors who had once watched from behind curtains now stood openly in the fading gold light. The sprinklers clicked on down the lane, the first porch lights warmed the cul-de-sac, and somewhere near the pool a gate closed with a soft metallic latch. Elias did not celebrate. He simply looked at the wall, then at the people gathered beside it, and understood that June's memorial had become something larger than grief. It had become a line the HOA could not cross again. It had become proof that quiet people are not powerless, that paper can protect memory, and that a neighborhood is not owned by the loudest person with a clipboard. It belongs to the people who remember one another. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.